I never thought I'd be sitting across from my husband of 25 years while he explained that our marriage was over because he'd found his soulmate in his 28-year-old executive assistant. Yet there I was, watching William Mitchell, the man who'd promised to grow old with me, fidget with his platinum wedding band before sliding it across our kitchen island like it was a business transaction he was eager to conclude. Before we jump in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Rebecca, you have to understand. These things happen. People grow. Apart, he said, not quite meeting my eyes. Natalie and it's different. We connect on a level that you and I never did. I stared at the ring, its soft gleam under our recessed lighting, a cruel reminder of the vows we'd exchanged on that sunny Colorado afternoon when we were young and impossibly in love. 25 years, 2 children, and one multi-million-dollar company later. Apparently I'd become as disposable as last quarter's business strategy. Different how, Will? I asked, surprised by the steadiness in my voice when my entire world was collapsing. Different like when we shared ramen noodles in our first apartment. Different like when I held your hand through both your parents' funerals? Or different like when I worked 2 jobs so you could get your MBA and start the business that's made you so wealthy, you can now trade in for a younger model. The signs had been there for months. Late nights at the office, sudden business trips, a password on his phone where there had never been one before. But I'd convinced myself it was the pressure of the upcoming merger. Mitchell Consulting Group was in negotiations to be acquired by TechForce International, and Will had been obsessed with getting the details right. After all, this was the culmination of everything we'd built together since we launched MCG from our garage while Emma was still in diapers and I was pregnant with Tyler. I remember the first stirrings of unease at the company Christmas party 3 months earlier. Will had always been attentive at these events, his hand at the small of my back, introducing me as the woman who made it all possible. But that night, he'd been distant, his attention repeatedly drawn to the striking brunette who'd started as his executive assistant in October. "That's Natalie," Olivia had whispered, following my gaze across the elegantly decorated ballroom of the Windsor Hotel. "She's got quite the reputation around the office." Olivia had been my best friend since college and ran our company's HR department. Her expression told me everything I needed to know, but I'd brushed it off. "Will would never," I'd said with the confidence of someone who believed 25 years of marriage made you immune to cliches. But as I sat at our kitchen island that evening in March, the truth was undeniable. Will wasn't just leaving me. He'd been planning his exit for months. "I'm keeping the house, of course," he continued, as if we were discussing something as trivial as dinner plans. "It makes sense with the business and my contacts. I found you a lovely condo downtown. 2 bedrooms, so the kids can visit when they're home from college." The casual cruelty of it stunned me. This was the home we'd designed. Together, where we'd raised our children, hosted countless dinner parties for clients who became friends. The Japanese maple in the backyard that we'd planted on our 10th anniversary was finally reaching maturity. "You've found me a condo?" I repeated slowly, the reality of his betrayal finally sinking in. "Just like that? And what about my role? In the company? I'm still Chief Financial Officer, remember? The company that we built together." Will had the decency to look uncomfortable then. He shifted in his seat, straightening the cuffs of his tailored shirt, a nervous habit I knew well from board meetings when he was about to deliver bad news. "About that, with the merger approaching. Rob and I think it might be best if you step down. A clean break, for everyone's sake." Rob Donovan, Will's business partner and our chief operations officer. Of course he'd be in on this too. The 2 of them had been inseparable since business school. "Let me get this straight," I said, feeling a strange calm descend over me. "You're leaving me for your assistant, taking our home, and pushing me out of my own company. The company I helped build while raising our children. The company that exists because I believed in you when no one else would. Don't be dramatic, Rebecca. Will sighed, checking his watch. You'll be well compensated in the divorce. I'm not a monster. Something inside me shifted then, a tectonic movement that altered my internal landscape forever. I'd spent 25 years supporting this man, believing in his dreams, making them my own. I'd set aside my own ambitions, in accounting, to become the backbone of Mitchell Consulting Group, handling the finances while Will became the charismatic face of the company. How long? I asked. What? How long have you been sleeping with her? Will had the audacity to look offended. That's not important. It is to me. He sighed again, a sound I once found endearing but now made me want to throw something. 6 months. But it's not just physical, Rebecca. Natalie understands me. She's brilliant with the clients. I held up my hand, silencing him. 6 months. So while I was planning our anniversary trip to Maui, you were planning how to leave me. The trip I'd spent months organizing, calling in favors to get reservations at the same beachfront cottage where we'd honeymooned. The trip Will had canceled at the last minute because of urgent client meetings that had apparently included intimate dinners with Natalie. I never meant to hurt you, he said, the platitude so hollow I almost laughed. Yet here we are. I stood up, suddenly needing distance between us. I'm not signing anything tonight. I'll have my lawyer review any paperwork you want to send over. Will looked surprised, as if he'd expected me to crumble, to beg, perhaps even to negotiate then and there. Your lawyer? Rebecca, there's no need to make this adversarial. We can keep this simple. Simple. As if dismantling 25 years of shared life could ever be simple. I think you should go now, I said, my voice distant to my own ears. And Will? Don't come back tonight, or tomorrow. In fact, why don't you move into that lovely condo you found for me? I'm sure Natalie will love helping you decorate it. After he left, I poured myself a glass of the ridiculously expensive Cabernet he'd been saving for a special occasion and called Olivia. Within an hour, she was at my door with takeout from our favorite Thai place and a fierceness in her eyes that reminded me why we'd been friends for so long. That absolute bastard, she fumed, setting out containers of pad thai and green curry on the coffee table. I knew something was off, but I never thought he'd try to push you out of the company. You basically built the financial structure that made MCG successful. I took a long sip of wine, the numbness beginning to give way to a dull, throbbing anger. Apparently, that doesn't matter. Will and Rob think it's best for everyone if I disappear quietly. Olivia snorted. Best for them, you mean? Have you called James yet? James Collins had been our personal attorney for years, though his specialty was actually corporate law. I'd always liked his methodical approach and unwavering ethics. First thing tomorrow, I promised. Tonight I just need to process. Olivia nodded, then hesitated. There's something else you should know. The rumor around the office is that Natalie's been sitting in on the merger negotiations. Rob's assistant told me she's been taking private notes for Will, separate from the official minutes. I frowned. That was unusual. As CFO, I'd been involved in the early stages of the merger talks, but Will had insisted on handling the final negotiations himself, claiming it was streamlining the process. I'd been hurt at the time but had chalked it up to his perfectionism. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Odd, I said slowly. Why would his assistant need separate notes? Olivia shrugged. No idea. But with everything else that's happening, it felt important to mention. That night, after Olivia left, I couldn't sleep. Our king-sized bed felt vast and empty, though Will had been sleeping in the guest room for weeks, claiming insomnia. Another lie in a growing collection. I padded down to Will's home office, a space I rarely entered out of respect for his privacy. The irony of that respect wasn't lost on me now. The room was immaculate as always. Will had never tolerated clutter. His laptop was gone, probably with him, but his filing cabinet remained. I hesitated only briefly before pulling open the top drawer. Most of it was what I expected: tax documents, insurance policies, warranties for electronics. But tucked in the back was a folder labeled simply TFI Merger. Inside were documents I'd never seen before, including a term sheet that made my blood run cold. The merger wasn't structured as we'd originally discussed. Instead of TechForce acquiring MCG's assets while keeping our management team intact, this version effectively cut me out completely. My equity stake, the 30% of the company I owned on paper, would be significantly devalued through a complex share reclassification scheme. Will and Rob's shares, meanwhile, would convert to premium stock in the new entity. I sank into Will's ergonomic chair, the implications washing over me. This wasn't just a husband leaving his wife. This was a calculated business maneuver designed to push me out while maximizing his gain. And he'd been planning it for months, right under my nose. My phone buzzed with a text. I expected Olivia checking in, but instead saw our son Tyler's name on the screen. "Mom, you up? Dad just called with some crazy story about you guys splitting up. What's going on?" My heart sank. Will had told our children before I could. Another calculated move to control the narrative. I took a deep breath and called Tyler back, then Emma afterward, spending hours reassuring them that I was okay, that this wasn't their fault, that nothing would change how much I loved them. By the time I finished these painful conversations, dawn was breaking over the mountains visible from our kitchen window. I made a pot of coffee, stronger than usual, and opened my laptop. If Will thought I was going to disappear quietly, he was about to learn how wrong he was. First, I emailed James Collins, requesting an urgent meeting. Then I began making a detailed inventory of everything I knew about Mitchell Consulting Group's finances, clients, and operations. As CFO, I had access to information Will might not realize I could leverage. I wasn't sure yet what my next move would be, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I wasn't going down without a fight. James Collins' office was in a beautifully restored Victorian near Denver's courthouse. Despite the circumstances, I felt a flicker of pride at being able to afford his services on my own. I'd maintained a separate investment account throughout our marriage, a habit from my early accounting days that Will had always gently teased me about. "Rebecca," James greeted me warmly, rising from behind his antique desk. "I was shocked when I got your email. I'm so sorry about everything." I nodded, throat suddenly tight. James had been at our 20th anniversary party, had helped us set up college funds for Emma and Tyler. The personal and professional were so intertwined in my life that unraveling one threatened to unravel everything. "Thank you for seeing me so quickly," I said, settling into the leather chair across from him. "Of course. Now tell me everything." For the next hour, I laid it all out. Will's affair, his demand that I leave our home, the attempt to force me out of the company, and most importantly, the merger documents I'd found. James listened intently, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When I finished, he leaned back, expression thoughtful. "Well, from a personal standpoint, Will's behavior is reprehensible. From a legal standpoint, it's potentially actionable." "What do you mean?" "The merger structure you described appears designed to dilute your equity position while enhancing Will and Rob's. That could constitute a breach of fiduciary duty, especially if they've been negotiating this without proper disclosure to all shareholders, meaning you." A faint hope stirred in my chest. "So I have options?" "You have more than options, Rebecca. You have leverage." James leaned forward. "What most people don't realize about these situations is that the person being pushed out often has more power than they think, if they're willing to use it." "I'm willing," I said without hesitation. "Tell me what to do." James smiled, the expression transforming his usually serious face. First, don't sign anything Will gives you. Divorce papers, company documents, nothing. Second, I want you to go back to work tomorrow as if nothing has changed. Your position as CFO gives you access we'll need. Will's expecting me to retreat, to work from home or take leave, I warned. All the better if you don't. Meanwhile, I'm going to look more closely at this merger. Something doesn't add up about TechForce's involvement. A deal this size leaves paper trails, and with your position, we can follow them legally. As I left James's office, I felt something I hadn't expected. A flicker of excitement beneath. The pain and anger. For years, I'd played the supportive wife and business partner, always careful not to overshadow Will's fragile ego. Now, I was free to advocate solely for myself. The next morning, I dressed with particular care, a sharp charcoal suit, subtle makeup, my grandmother's pearl earrings that always gave me confidence. When I walked into Mitchell Consulting Group's sleek downtown offices, conversations stopped as employees quickly averted their gazes. News traveled fast. Olivia met me by the elevator, concern etched on her face. "You're here. Are you sure that's a good idea?" "Absolutely," I replied, loud enough for nearby ears. "I'm still CFO, aren't I?" My office was next to Will's, with a connecting door we'd used frequently over the years. Today, that door remained firmly shut as I settled in and began reviewing the company's financial records with new eyes. Just before noon, Rob Donovan appeared in my doorway, his usual jovial expression replaced with awkward discomfort. "Rebecca, we weren't expecting you today." "Clearly," I replied, not looking up from my computer. Did I miss a memo stating the CFO's presence was optional? Rob shifted his weight. "No, of course not. It's just given the circumstances." I finally looked up, fixing him with a steady gaze. The circumstances being that my husband is having an affair with his assistant? Or the circumstances where you and Will are attempting to restructure my equity position in the merger without proper disclosure? The color drained from Rob's face. "I don't know what Will has told you, but this is a very complex transaction." "Save it, Rob," I interrupted. "I've reviewed the term sheets, all of them, including the ones Will thought I didn't know about." Rob cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should discuss this with Will present." "By all means," I gestured to the connecting door. "He is in today, isn't he? Or is he apartment hunting with Natalie?" The barb hit home, and Rob retreated, murmuring something about scheduling a proper meeting. I returned to my work, heart pounding but resolve strengthening. I'd just fired the first shot in what I knew would be a difficult battle. By mid-afternoon, the inevitable summons came, a calendar invitation to the main conference room. The subject line read simply, "Discussion." When I walked in, Will, Rob, and Natalie were already seated, along with Marcus Hendricks, the company's corporate counsel. The sight of Natalie beside Will, her hand briefly touching his arm in a gesture of support, sent a wave of nausea through me. I pushed it down, focusing instead on the empty chair they'd left for me, at the far end of the table, opposite Will's position at the head. Instead of taking it, I pulled out the chair next to Marcus. "I hope you don't mind," I said pleasantly. "Better sightlines from here?" Will's jaw tightened. "Rebecca, I think we all know why we're here." "Do we?" I kept my tone light. "I assumed it was to discuss the TechForce merger, specifically the undisclosed changes to the equity structure that affect my position as a shareholder." Marcus shifted uncomfortably. As corporate counsel, he reported to the board, which consisted of Will, Rob, and me. "Actually," Will began, "we wanted to discuss a transition plan for your role. Given our personal situation, we think it's best if you continue to try excluding me from critical business decisions." I finished for him. "I don't agree. And as a major shareholder and officer of this company, my agreement matters. Rob leaned forward. Rebecca, be reasonable. This is painful for everyone. We're just trying to find the cleanest way forward. Clean for whom? I asked. The terms I've seen significantly devalue my ownership stake while enhancing yours, and Will's. That doesn't seem particularly clean to me. Natalie, who had been silent until now, spoke up. Mr. Mitchell has been very generous in the personal settlement he's offering. Perhaps focusing on that would be more productive. The audacity of this woman, barely out of graduate school, lecturing me about the company I'd helped build before. She was even in high school made something snap inside me. Ms. Parker, I said, my voice glacial. As this appears to be a meeting between company officers and legal counsel, perhaps you could explain your role here? Are you taking minutes? Or are you here in your capacity as the woman sleeping with the CEO? Will slammed his hand on the table. That's enough. This is exactly why this arrangement can't work. I turned to Marcus. As corporate counsel, perhaps you could clarify something for me. If shareholders discover that officers of the company have been negotiating a merger in bad faith, specifically structuring it to benefit certain shareholders at the expense of others, what might the legal implications be? Marcus glanced nervously between Will and me. That would potentially constitute a breach of fiduciary duty. And could such actions be grounds for a shareholder lawsuit that might delay or even derail the merger entirely? Before Marcus could answer, Will cut in. This is ridiculous. Rebecca, you're upset about our marriage and you're letting it affect your professional judgment. I smiled thinly. No, Will. For the first time in years, I'm seeing things with perfect clarity. This meeting is over. I'll be at my desk if anyone needs the CFO's input on actual company business. As I walked out, leaving stunned silence behind me, I felt a power I hadn't experienced in years. Will had underestimated me, assuming that the personal betrayal would leave me too devastated to fight back professionally. He was about to learn how wrong he was. That night, I couldn't sleep. The confrontation in the conference room kept replaying in my mind as I paced the empty hallways of the home Will and I had built together. Every corner held memories. The kitchen where we'd celebrated, landing our first major client, the living room where we'd opened champagne when Emma got into Northwestern, the study where we'd sketched out Mitchell Consulting Group's 5-year plan on a whiteboard at midnight. I found myself standing in front of the large framed photo from MCG's 10th anniversary party. Will and I stood center stage, champagne, flutes raised, surrounded by our team of then 30 employees. His arm was around my waist, my head resting slightly against his shoulder. We looked triumphant, unified, a team. What happened to us? I whispered to the smiling couple in the photo. My phone buzzed with a text from Olivia. You okay? Heard about the meeting. Office is buzzing. I typed back, still processing, coming. In tomorrow. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, then reappeared. Finally. You're a badass, Rebecca Mitchell. Get some sleep. Sleep, however, remained elusive. Around 2 a.m., I made my way to the kitchen for tea and found myself opening my laptop instead. I pulled up MCG's shareholder agreement, a document I knew intimately as CFO but had never scrutinized from my current perspective. 3 hours and 2 pots of Earl Grey later, I found what I was looking for. A clause buried in the original agreement from when we'd first taken on outside investment. In the event of a change in marital status between shareholders, all unvested shares remain with their original designated owner, and any jointly held shares must be resolved through mutual agreement or remain in escrow until such agreement is reached. Will and I each officially owned 30% of the company, with Rob holding 25% and the remaining 15% distributed among early employees and investors. But there was a crucial detail Will might have forgotten. 10% of his shares had been granted as performance incentives and technically weren't fully vested yet. More importantly, we had an additional 12% held in a family trust, shares we'd set aside for Emma and Tyler, technically owned jointly until they turned 30. Those shares, according to the agreement, couldn't be transferred without mutual consent during a divorce. I quickly did the math. If those shares remained in escrow during our divorce proceedings, Will wouldn't have enough voting power to approve the merger without me. I couldn't stop him from leaving me for Natalie, but I could potentially stop him from cutting me out of the company we'd built together. For the first time since Will had slid his wedding ring across our kitchen island, I felt a glimmer of hope. Not for our marriage, that was over, but for myself, for my future. I'd spent 25 years being Will Mitchell's wife, Will Mitchell's business partner, always defined in relation to him. Now I had the chance to redefine myself. I closed my laptop and watched the sunrise paint the mountains gold. By the time I showered and dressed for work, I'd made my decision. I wasn't going to fade away quietly. I wasn't going to let Will and Rob push me out of what was rightfully mine. I was going to fight, not out of spite or revenge, but for recognition of my worth and contribution. As I drove to the office, I called James Collins. "I found something in the shareholder agreement," I said without preamble. "Something that gives us leverage." "I'm listening," he replied. After I explained the clause about shares in escrow during divorce, James was silent for a moment. "That's significant," he finally said. "If we file for divorce before the merger goes through, those shared trust shares could be frozen. Will wouldn't have the voting power to approve the deal structure." "Exactly," I said, pulling into the parking garage beneath MCG's offices. "So, what's our next move?" "File for divorce immediately, citing irreconcilable differences. I'll have the paperwork ready by noon. And Rebecca, don't tell anyone at the office what we're planning. Element of surprise is crucial here." I agreed and ended the call, straightening my shoulders as I stepped into the elevator. When the doors opened on our floor, I was surprised to see several employees gathered in hushed conversation near reception. They scattered when they saw me, avoiding eye contact. Olivia intercepted me before I reached my office, pulling me into the empty break room. "There's a rumor going around," she said in a low voice. "Will called an all-staff meeting for this afternoon. Word is they're going to announce your transition." My stomach tightened. "Already? That's moving fast." Olivia nodded grimly. "The TechForce team is coming in next week for what's supposed to be final negotiations. I think Will wants you out before then." "Did you hear anything about the meeting's specific agenda?" "Just that HR is preparing some kind of announcement about leadership changes." She hesitated. "Rebecca, I hate to ask this, but is my job safe? I've always been seen as your person, and with everything happening." The question caught me off guard. In my focus on my own situation, I hadn't considered the ripple effects on others loyal to me. Olivia had been with MCG almost from the beginning, turning down more lucrative offers over the years out of loyalty to our friendship and the company culture we'd built. "I don't know," I admitted. "But whatever happens, we'll face it together. I'm not giving up without a fight, and I won't forget who stood by me." She squeezed my arm. That's all I needed to hear. Back in my office, I immersed myself in financial reports while waiting for James to send the divorce paperwork. Around 11, my office door opened without a knock. Will stood there, looking irritated. "We need to talk," he said. I glanced, pointedly at my watch. "I'm rather busy. Perhaps you could send a calendar invite like a professional." His jaw tightened. "This isn't a game, Rebecca." "I'm quite aware of that." He stepped fully into my office, closing the door behind him. "You're making this harder than it needs to be. The all-hands meeting is at 3 p.m. We're announcing your departure from the company. You can either be there and make it look amicable or not. Either way, it's happening." "Under what authority?" I asked calmly. "Last I checked, removing a company officer requires board approval. The board consists of you, me, and Rob. I don't recall voting on my own removal." Will's expression darkened. "Don't be naive. 2 out of 3 is all we need." Actually, according to our bylaws, removal of a founding officer requires unanimous consent unless there's evidence of gross misconduct. I smiled thinly. Has my work performance been unsatisfactory, Will? Or is sleeping with your assistant the only misconduct happening at MCG these days? A flush crept up his neck. This isn't about Natalie. Isn't it, though? She's sitting in on merger meetings, taking private notes. Tell me, does TechForce know your negotiations are being documented by someone with no official role in the company? Someone whose presence could potentially compromise confidentiality? It was a shot in the dark, but the flicker of alarm in Will's eyes told me I'd hit closer to home than expected. You're upset about the divorce, and you're lashing out, he said, but his confidence had visibly faltered. Take some time off. Go stay with your sister in Phoenix. By the time you come back, the merger will be done and we can all move forward. My email pinged. James Collins, right on schedule. I opened it casually, confirming it contained the divorce filing ready for my electronic signature. I don't think I'll be doing that, I said, turning my attention back to Will. In fact, I have other plans. What plans? I signed the divorce papers with a few clicks and hit submit before looking up at him. You'll find out soon enough. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do before this all-hands meeting you've planned. After Will left, I called James to confirm he'd received my signed paperwork. It's filed, he assured me. Will should be served within the hour. Now, about this meeting. Are you planning to attend? Absolutely. If Will wants to remove me as CFO, he'll have to do it to my face. James sighed. Rebecca, I admire your courage, but these situations can get ugly fast. Are you sure you want to be there? I'm sure. For 25 years, I've stood beside Will while he took credit for our shared success. He doesn't get to push me aside now without facing me directly. All right, James conceded. But remember, anything you say in that meeting could affect our legal position. Stay calm, stick to facts, and if possible, record it. Colorado is a one-party consent state for recording conversations. I promised to be careful and ended the call, then spent the next few hours preparing for the confrontation ahead. I pulled together key financial records, reviewed our bylaws once more, and even practiced what I might say if called upon. At 2:45 p.m., I made my way to the large conference room where all-hands meetings were held. Employees were already filing in, conversations dropping to whispers as I entered. I spotted Natalie near the front, looking polished and professional, in a navy dress that probably cost more than a junior employee's monthly salary. The sight of her made my stomach clench, but I kept my expression neutral as I took a seat in the middle of the room rather than at the executive table at the front. Will and Rob entered last, both looking grim. Will's eyes swept the room, faltering slightly when they landed on me. I smiled pleasantly, noting with satisfaction the confusion that crossed his face. Thank you all for coming on short notice, Will began, his CEO voice in full effect, confident, authoritative, the voice that had closed countless deals over the years. As many of you know, Mitchell Consulting Group is in the final stages of a merger with TechForce International. This represents an incredible opportunity for our company to scale our solutions and enter new markets. He paused, making eye contact, with various employees around the room. A technique I'd watched him perfect at countless presentations. With any major transition comes changes in leadership structure. Today, we're announcing several such changes that will position MCG optimally. As we enter this new chapter, a ripple of unease moved through the room. This wasn't just about me, I realized. Other people's roles were changing too. First, Will continued, I'm pleased to announce that Rob Donovan will be taking on the role of Chief Integration Officer, leading the merger implementation team. Rob nodded solemnly, accepting muted applause. Additionally, Will said, his voice noticeably tightening, Rebecca Mitchell will be stepping down as Chief Financial Officer, effective immediately. The silence that followed was deafening. All eyes turned to me, expressions ranging from shock to pity. I remained perfectly still, my face composed. Lisa Chen from our finance team will be stepping into the interim CFO role while we search for a permanent replacement, Will continued, gesturing to a surprised-looking woman in the back row. Rebecca has been an integral part of MCG's growth, and we thank her for her service. Service. As if I were a long-term employee being given a gold watch at retirement, not a co-founder and equal architect of the company's success. Will cleared his throat. Rebecca, would you like to say a few words? It was a calculated move. He expected me to decline, to slink away in humiliation. Or perhaps to lose my composure and rage, confirming the narrative that I was too emotional to remain in leadership during this transition. Instead, I stood calmly and made my way to the front of the room. Will reluctantly stepped aside, though not far enough, a subtle attempt to maintain physical control of the space. I moved to the center of the floor, turning to face both the employees and the executive table where Will and Rob now sat. "Thank you, Will," I said, my voice steady. "I know many of you are surprised by this announcement. Frankly, so am I." A nervous chuckle rippled through the audience. Will's expression darkened. When Will and I founded Mitchell Consulting Group, 20 years ago in our garage, we made a promise to each other and to everyone who joined us. Integrity would always come first. That meant transparent communication, ethical business practices, and treating each person, employee, client, or competitor, with respect. I paused, letting my gaze sweep across the assembled employees. Unfortunately, it seems some of those founding principles have been forgotten in recent months. As CFO and a major shareholder, I was not consulted about my stepping down. In fact, according to our company bylaws, removing a founding officer requires unanimous board approval or evidence of gross misconduct. Will shifted in his seat, leaning forward. "Rebecca, this isn't the appropriate forum." "On the contrary," I interrupted smoothly. "An all-hands meeting called to announce leadership changes seems exactly the appropriate forum to discuss. Leadership changes. Especially when those changes may affect the merger everyone has been working so hard to complete." I turned back to the employees. What Will hasn't mentioned is that earlier today, I filed for divorce due to his ongoing affair with a member of our staff. Gasps and whispers erupted. Natalie's face flushed deep red. I mention this not to air dirty laundry, but because it directly impacts the merger. According to our shareholder agreement, certain shares are now frozen in escrow until our divorce is finalized. Without those shares, Will lacks the voting power to approve the current merger structure, a structure, I might add, that was negotiated without proper disclosure to all shareholders and appears designed to significantly devalue my equity position. The room had gone completely silent. Will stood abruptly, face contorted with anger. "That's enough. This is completely inappropriate." Before he could continue, the conference room door opened. A courier stepped in, looking uncertain. "William." "Mitchell," he called. Will turned, irritated by the interruption. "I'm in the middle of something important." "I have documents to serve you, sir," the courier said, approaching with an envelope. "You've been named in a divorce filing by Rebecca Mitchell." The timing couldn't have been more perfect if I'd planned it. Will took the envelope in stunned silence as murmurs rippled through the room. I couldn't help the small, satisfied smile that crossed my face. "As I was saying," I continued calmly, "given these new legal and financial realities, I will not be stepping down as CFO. I will continue serving in my role while James Collins, our attorney, reviews the merger terms to ensure they're equitable for all shareholders." Rob finally found his voice. "Rebecca, you're putting the entire merger at risk. Years of work could be lost because of your personal issues." "My personal issues wouldn't affect the merger if the merger hadn't been specifically restructured. To diminish my position," I countered. "I'm not opposed to the merger itself, only to the underhanded way it's been handled." I turned back to the employees, many of whom looked shell-shocked. I apologize that you've all been put in this uncomfortable position. This is a dispute between executives that should never have affected the broader team. I assure you that my priority remains the health of this company and the well-being of everyone who works here. With that, I walked back to my seat, heart pounding, but outwardly composed. The room remained silent until Will, visibly struggling to regain control, dismissed everyone with instructions to return to their work. As people filed out, the buzz of conversation grew louder, speculation running rampant. Olivia caught up with me in the hallway, eyes wide. Holy hell, Rebecca. I don't even have words. Neither does Will, apparently, I said, watching as he stormed toward his office, divorce papers clutched in his hand. But this is just the beginning. Back in my office, I was barely settled when my phone rang. It was James Collins. I just heard what happened at the meeting, he said, not bothering with pleasantries. News travels fast. Are you all right? Better than all right, I replied. Will was completely blindsided. The divorce papers were served right in the middle of the meeting. James chuckled. Perfect timing, though I can't take credit for that. Rebecca, you've thrown down the gauntlet in spectacular fashion, but now comes the hard part. Will and Rob won't take this lying down. I know. What's our next move? I've been reviewing the financial disclosures for the merger, and something isn't adding up. The valuation seems artificially low compared to similar deals in the industry. I'd like to bring in a forensic accountant friend of mine to take a deeper look. I frowned. You think there's deliberate undervaluation? Why would Will and Rob want that? I'm not sure yet, James admitted. But if TechForce is getting MCG at below market value, the question becomes, what's in it for Will? And Rob personally? Look into any side agreements, consulting contracts, equity grants, anything that might incentivize them separately from the main deal. I'll start digging right away, I promised. No sooner had I hung up than my office door flew open. Will stood there, face flushed with anger, divorce papers still clutched in his hand. What the hell was that? He demanded. I leaned back in my chair. That was me refusing to be discarded like last year's financial report. You humiliated me, in front of the entire company. And you tried to push me out of the company I helped build while sleeping with your assistant. I'd say we're even. Will slammed the divorce papers on my desk. You think this changes anything? The merger is still happening. TechForce wants this deal. Perhaps, I acknowledged. But not on the terms you negotiated without my knowledge. Not on terms designed to cheat me out of my fair share. This isn't about fairness. It's about business. I stood slowly, meeting his gaze. You're right, Will. It is about business. And you've forgotten that I've been beside you for every major business decision for 20 years. I know how you think, I know how you negotiate, and I know when. You're hiding something. I stepped closer. What's really in this deal for you and Rob? What aren't you telling me? A flicker of something, alarm, guilt, I couldn't quite tell, crossed his face before he masked it. You're being paranoid, he said, but there was a defensiveness in his tone that hadn't been there before. Am I? Then you won't mind if I review all the merger documentation. The complete set, not just what you've selectively shared. Those documents are confidential. Not from the CFO, they're not. We stared at each other, the 25 years between us compressed into this single moment of confrontation. For a second, I saw a glimpse of the Will I'd fallen in love with, determined, passionate, slightly reckless. Then his expression hardened again. Fine. Review whatever you want. It won't change anything. After he left, I sat back down, hands shaking slightly from the adrenaline. The confrontation had confirmed what I already suspected. There was something in the merger Will didn't want me to find. Now, I just had to figure out what it was. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of activity. I combed through financial records, merger documents, and email exchanges looking for anything unusual. Meanwhile, the office buzzed with the aftermath of the dramatic meeting, employees gathering in small clusters to whisper and speculate. Around 6, Olivia appeared in my doorway. "I just got a call from Lisa Chen. She's refusing the interim CFO position." She grinned, said she's not comfortable stepping into a role that isn't actually vacant. I smiled, touched by this small act of loyalty. Good for her. Most of the finance team feels the same way. They're with you, Rebecca. This news bolstered my resolve. I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was fighting for a vision of the company where integrity mattered, where loyalty was rewarded. "Thank you for telling me," I said. "And Olivia?" "Be careful. Will might retaliate against anyone seen as supporting me." She shrugged. "Let him try. Some things are worth the risk." After she left, I continued working, losing track of time until my phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "Mom, are you okay? Tyler and I are worried. Dad's not answering our calls." My heart clenched. With everything happening, I hadn't checked in with my children since the brief, painful conversations of the previous night. I called Emma immediately. "I'm fine, sweetie. It's been a complicated day. Dad told us last night that you two were separating, but now there are all these posts on social media about some big drama at the company. What's going on?" I closed my eyes, wishing I could shield my children from all this messiness. "Your father and I are divorcing, yes, and there's a dispute about the company, but it's going to be okay. Is it true about Dad and his assistant?" Her voice was small, hurt. I sighed. "Yes. I'm sorry you had to find out this way." "Why is he doing this? To you? To us? It doesn't make sense." An excellent question. One I'd been asking myself since the moment Will slid his wedding ring across our kitchen island. People change, Emma. Sometimes they make choices that hurt the people who love them. But this isn't about you or Tyler. Your father loves you both very much. We talked for a while longer. Then I spoke with Tyler too, reassuring both of them that despite everything, we would get through this as a family. When I finally hung up, emotionally drained, I noticed it was past 9. The office had grown quiet, most employees having left hours ago. I was gathering my things to leave when my computer pinged with a new email. It was from an address I didn't recognize, with the subject line, "What you're looking for." Cautiously, I opened it. The message contained only one line. "Check the separate TechForce retention agreements, Level 4 encrypted folder." I frowned, puzzled by both the message and its mysterious sender. Level 4 encryption was our highest security protocol, reserved for the most sensitive client and personnel data. As CFO, I had access but rarely needed to use it. I navigated to our secure server and entered my authentication credentials, then searched for TechForce files. Nothing unusual appeared at first, but then I noticed a folder simply labeled TFI Retention tucked within the HR directory, an odd place for merger documents. The folder required additional authentication. I entered my secondary password, and the contents appeared. 3 PDF files labeled with initials: WM Agreement, RD Agreement, and NP Agreement. WM, William Mitchell, RD, Robert Donovan, and NP could only be Natalie Parker. I opened Will's file first. It was a consulting agreement between him and TechForce International, to begin immediately after the merger closed. The terms made, my breath catch, a 5-year contract at $2 million annually, plus stock options potentially worth tens of millions more. Rob's agreement was similar, though at a lower compensation level. But it was Natalie's that truly shocked me. Despite her junior position and brief tenure with MCG, she was being offered a vice president role at TechForce with compensation that dwarfed her current salary. These weren't standard retention agreements, they were side deals, massive financial incentives for Will, Rob and Natalie specifically, separate from the official merger terms, and crucially, not disclose to other shareholders. Now I understood. The merger wasn't being undervalued accidentally. It was being deliberately devalued to minimize the payout to shareholders like me, while Will, Rob, and Natalie received their real compensation through these separate agreements. It was more than unethical. It was potentially illegal. I quickly forwarded the files to my personal email and to James Collins, then downloaded copies to an encrypted USB drive I kept for sensitive financial data. As I was about to log out, I hesitated, wondering about the anonymous email that had led me here. Who in the company would have both known about these agreements and wanted to help me? That question would have to wait. I had what I needed, evidence, that Will and Rob were negotiating in bad faith, enriching themselves at the expense of other shareholders. Tomorrow, I would decide how best to use it. As I drove home through the quiet streets of Denver, a strange sense of calm settled over me. For years, I'd been the supportive wife, the reliable business partner, always putting Will's needs and the company's needs ahead of my own. Now, for perhaps the first time, I was fighting solely for myself, and it felt right. Not just right, it felt liberating. My phone rang through the car's Bluetooth. James Collins. Rebecca, I just saw the files you sent. This changes everything. I know. What's our next move? James's voice was grim but satisfied. Now we have real leverage. Tomorrow, we go on the offensive. I smiled as I pulled into my driveway. I'm ready. I woke the next morning to the sound of my phone vibrating incessantly on the nightstand. The clock read 6:03 a.m., far earlier than anyone should be calling unless there was an emergency. I grabbed the phone, heart racing, thinking it might be Emma or Tyler. Instead, it was a Denver Post reporter. Ms. Mitchell? Stephanie Lawson from the Post. I was hoping to get your comment on the situation at Mitchell Consulting Group. Sources tell us there was quite a scene yesterday. I sat up, instantly alert. How did you get this number, Ms. Lawson? I'm afraid I can't reveal my sources, she replied smoothly. But I can tell you that several employees have reached out to us about the apparent leadership struggle between you and your husband. Care to comment? No, I said firmly. MCG is a private company, and this is a private matter. What about the allegations that William Mitchell has been having an affair with his executive assistant while negotiating a merger that would push you out of the company you co-founded? That seems like a matter of public interest, especially given MCG's profile in the Denver business community. My grip tightened on the phone. I have no comment at this time. Please don't call again. I hung up, mind racing. Someone at the company had leaked the story. Whether out of loyalty to me or simple love of gossip, I couldn't be sure. But now the situation had a new dimension: public scrutiny. Before I could fully process this, my phone buzzed again with a text from Olivia. SOS emergency board meeting called for 8 a.m. Probably should get here ASAP. I texted back, on my way? Any idea what's happening? Her response was quick. Will is on the warpath, showed up with external counsel. External counsel meant Will wasn't relying on Marcus Hendricks, our company attorney. He was bringing in outside firepower. I quickly called James Collins as I rushed to get dressed. Will's called an emergency board meeting, I said as soon as he answered. He's bringing external lawyers. James wasn't surprised. I expected something like this after you confronted him publicly. He's probably going to try to force a vote to remove you, claiming your behavior was detrimental to the company. Can he do that? He can try. The good news is, we have those side agreements now. That's our ace. I'm heading to your office. Don't start the meeting without me. I arrived at MCG headquarters by 7:30, the normally bustling office still quiet at this early hour. A few employees were already at their desks, looking up with curious expressions as I passed. News traveled fast in our tight-knit company. Everyone knew something significant was happening. Olivia intercepted me near the executive conference room, her expression tense. They're already in there. Will, Rob, Marcus, and some shark-looking woman in a power suit I've never seen before. External counsel, I confirmed. Is James here yet? Just arrived. He's waiting in your office. I found James reviewing documents, his expression grim but determined. Rebecca, he greeted me, standing. Before we go in there, we need to discuss strategy. I'm listening. Will is almost certainly going to claim that your public disclosure of his affair with Natalie and the ensuing media attention constitutes conduct detrimental to the company. Under the bylaws, that could be grounds for removing you as an officer. But I have the secret retention agreements, I reminded him. Their undisclosed side deals are much more detrimental. James nodded. Precisely, that's our counter, but we need to be strategic about when and how we reveal that information. If we show our hand too early, they'll have time to craft a response. Wait for the right moment. We walked together to the conference room, James's solid presence beside me providing comfort I desperately needed. When we entered, the conversation inside immediately ceased. Will, Rob, and Marcus Hendricks sat on one side of the table, joined by a stern-looking woman with sleek silver hair and calculating eyes. Natalie was notably absent. Rebecca, Will acknowledged coldly. I see you've brought your own counsel. As have you, I replied, nodding to the unfamiliar woman. This is Victoria Hargrove from Hargrove Westfield and Chen, Will introduced. Her. She specializes in corporate governance. Victoria didn't smile as she appraised me. Ms. Mitchell, I've heard a great deal about you. I'm sure you have, I replied pleasantly, taking a seat across from them with James beside me. Though I suspect Will's version may be somewhat biased. Will ignored this, shuffling papers importantly. I've called this emergency board meeting to address Rebecca's inappropriate behavior yesterday, which has already resulted in media inquiries and potential damage to our company's reputation. Let's be clear about what happened yesterday, I interjected. I refused to be removed from my position without proper procedure, and I disclosed conflicts of interest that could affect our pending merger. There was nothing inappropriate about it. Victoria Hargrove cleared her throat. Ms. Mitchell, publicly airing personal grievances in a company-wide meeting and making unfounded accusations about the merger process is not only inappropriate but potentially actionable as a breach of your fiduciary duty. James leaned forward. My client disclosed relevant information that directly impacts the company's financial structure and shareholder value. That's not a breach of fiduciary duty. It's an embodiment of it. Will's jaw tightened. Regardless of how you want to frame it, Rebecca's behavior has created chaos within the company. Employees are distracted, clients are calling with concerns, and now we have reporters sniffing around. This is exactly the kind of instability we can't afford during a sensitive merger process. Interesting that you mention the merger process, I said, keeping my voice level. Because that's at the heart of my concerns. The merger terms were deliberately restructured to devalue my equity position while providing undisclosed benefits to certain parties. Victoria raised an eyebrow. That's a serious allegation, Ms. Mitchell. Do you have evidence to support it? I glanced at James, who gave a subtle nod. It was time to play our card. Actually, I do, I replied, opening my laptop. Last night, I discovered separate retention agreements for Will, Rob, and Natalie Parker. Agreements that provide substantial compensation far beyond what was disclosed to other shareholders. I turned my laptop around, displaying the first page of Will's agreement with its multi-million-dollar terms. The color drained from his face as he recognized the document. Where did you get that? He demanded. From our company's secure server, where I have every right to access files as CFO. These agreements show that while the merger undervalues MCG overall, reducing the payout to shareholders like me, you three are receiving millions in separate compensation. Victoria Hargrove's expression remained impassive, but she shot Will a sharp look. Marcus Hendricks shifted uncomfortably. "This is a serious ethical breach," James said into the silence. "Potentially a legal one as well. Corporate officers, negotiating personal benefits without disclosure to other shareholders is textbook self-dealing." Rob finally spoke, his voice strained. "These were standard retention agreements offered by TechForce to ensure leadership continuity. There's nothing unusual about that." "There's nothing unusual about retention agreements," I agreed. "What's unusual is the scale of these packages, their secrecy, and the fact that they coincide with a merger valuation that significantly undervalues the company as a whole." Will slammed his hand on the table. "This is ridiculous. You're trying to derail the entire merger because you're bitter about our marriage ending." "No, Will. I'm protecting my financial interests, and the interests of every other shareholder. You've been planning to shortchange. The fact that you're sleeping with Natalie, who's also receiving a sweetheart deal, is just an unpleasant detail." Victoria Hargrove had been studying the document on my laptop, her professional demeanor cracking slightly as she absorbed the terms. She leaned over to whisper something to Will, who shook his head vehemently. "We need to confer," Victoria announced, standing. "I suggest we take a brief recess." James nodded. 15 minutes. We'll wait here." As they filed out, Marcus Hendricks lingered, looking troubled. Once the others were gone, he turned to me. "Rebecca, I want you to know I had no idea about these side agreements. As corporate counsel, I should have been informed." I believed him. Marcus had always been straightforward and ethical, often pushing back when Will or Rob wanted to take shortcuts. "I appreciate that, Marcus. But you understand what this means, don't you? They were deliberately keeping you in the dark." He nodded, face grim. "It puts me in a difficult position. My obligation is to the company, not to individual executives." "Then I suggest you remind them of that when they return," James said. After Marcus left, James and I quickly strategized. "They're cornered," he said quietly. "Victoria is probably telling Will right now that these agreements create serious legal exposure. The question is whether they'll back down or double down." "Will never backs down," I replied. "It's not in his nature." "Then we need to be prepared for escalation. What's your ideal outcome here, Rebecca? What do you want?" I considered the question. What did I want? Revenge? Satisfaction? More than anything, I wanted recognition. Acknowledgement of my role in building MCG, of my value beyond being Will Mitchell's wife and business partner. "I want what's fair," I said finally. "A merger that reflects the true value of my contribution and equity. And I want to maintain a meaningful role in the company's future, at least through the transition." James nodded. "Then that's what we'll fight for." When Will and the others returned, the atmosphere had changed subtly. Victoria looked composed but less confident, while Will and Rob seemed tense. "We've reviewed the situation," Victoria began carefully, "and while we maintain that Ms. Mitchell's behavior yesterday was inappropriate, we recognize there may be legitimate concerns about aspects of the merger negotiation process." "Legitimate concerns?" James repeated. "Let's be clear. We have documented evidence of self-dealing by corporate officers, which at minimum requires disclosure to shareholders and potentially to regulators." Victoria's lips thinned. "We're prepared to discuss adjustments to the merger terms to address any perceived inequities." "Adjustments aren't enough," I said firmly. "The entire deal needs to be restructured transparently, with independent valuation and equal treatment of all shareholders." Will leaned forward, eyes hard. "You're threatening to blow up a deal, worth millions to everyone involved. Is that really what you want? To destroy what we've built because you're angry with me? I'm not the one who compromised what we built, Will. You did that the moment you decided to push me out and enrich yourself at my expense." Rob interjected, his tone conciliatory. "Look, Rebecca, we all want what's best for the company. Maybe there's a middle ground here." "The middle ground is honesty and fair dealing," I replied. something that's been sadly lacking. Victoria conferred briefly with Will before addressing us again. We proposed the following: a 2-week pause on merger proceedings while an independent financial advisor reviews the valuation and terms. During this period, all current officers remain in their positions, and no public statements are made by any party about the company or the merger. James and I exchanged glances. A pause would give us time to fully review the merger documents and potentially find other issues. It also maintained my position as CFO for now. We would require full access to all merger documentation, James stipulated, including any communications between MCG executives and TechForce representatives. Victoria hesitated, but Will nodded reluctantly. Fine. And one more thing, I added. Natalie Parker is reassigned immediately. She no longer works directly with Will or has any involvement in the merger process. Will's face darkened. That's personal, not business. It's both, given her inclusion in the side agreements. Her relationship with you creates an obvious conflict of interest. After another heated whispered conversation with Victoria, Will conceded this point too. Agreed. But this pause is only for 2 weeks. After that, we move forward one way or another. We finalized the terms of our temporary truce, and James drafted a brief agreement that everyone signed. It wasn't victory, but it was breathing room, and validation that my concerns were legitimate. As the meeting concluded, Will lingered behind as the others left. When we were alone, his mask of corporate confidence slipped, revealing a glimpse of the man I'd spent 25 years with. Was any of it real, Rebecca? He asked, his voice uncharacteristically vulnerable. These past few years, I mean. Were you happy at all? Or was it all just business to you? The question caught me off guard. After everything he'd done, he was asking if I had been genuine. I loved you, Will. For 25 years, I loved you. I believed in you, in us, in what we were building together. That was real for me. The question is whether it was ever real for you. He looked away. It was, once. But somewhere along the way, I started feeling invisible to you, like I was just another item on your checklist. I stared at him, incredulous. Invisible? I organized our anniversary trip while you were sleeping with your assistant. I managed our home, raised our children, and helped run our company, all while making sure your favorite coffee was stocked and your shirts were pressed exactly how you liked them. When exactly in all of that did you feel invisible? He had no answer for that. After a moment, he simply nodded and left, shoulders slightly slumped, a posture I'd rarely seen in the confident, charismatic William Mitchell. Once alone, I sank into my chair, the adrenaline of the confrontation draining away, leaving me exhausted. I texted Olivia. Meeting over, 2-week pause on everything, I'm still CFO. Her reply was immediate. Victory lap, drinks tonight at Mountain Brew, non-negotiable. I smiled, grateful for her unwavering support. Then I called James to plan our next steps. We need to move quickly during these 2 weeks, he advised. Will may have agreed to the pause, but he'll be maneuvering behind the scenes. Agreed. I want a complete audit of all communication between our executives and TechForce. And we should notify TechForce about the situation. They may not be aware of the side deals Will and Rob negotiated. That's risky, James cautioned. It could blow back on you if it appears you're trying to sabotage the merger. I'm not trying to sabotage it. I'm trying to ensure it's fair. If TechForce is an ethical company, they should be concerned about dealing with executives who negotiate secret side benefits. After ending the call, I stepped out of the conference room to find the office fully awake and buzzing with activity. Employees watched me curiously as I walked to my office, uncertainty in their expressions. They'd witnessed yesterday's drama and now sensed another power shift, but didn't know what it meant for them or the company. I stopped by Olivia's office on the way. We need to address the staff, I told her. Everyone's on edge. Can you schedule Something for this afternoon? Already done, she replied. Will agreed to a joint announcement about the merger pause at 2 p.m. I raised an eyebrow. Joint announcement? That's surprisingly cooperative of him. She shrugged. Victoria Hargrove insisted, according to Marcus, something about presenting a unified front to minimize disruption. The morning passed in a flurry of activity as I began the meticulous process of reviewing all merger documentation. Around noon, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Rebecca Mitchell, I answered. Ms. Mitchell, this is Jonathan Reeves, CEO of TechForce International. I sat up straighter, pulse quickening. Mr. Reeves, this is unexpected. Yes, well, I've just had a rather illuminating conversation with your husband about certain complexities in our merger negotiations. I thought it might be beneficial for us to speak directly. So Will had reached out to TechForce already, undoubtedly trying to control the narrative. I would welcome that conversation, Mr. Reeves. Would you prefer to meet in person? I'm actually flying to Denver this afternoon. Would you be available for dinner? Absolutely. We arranged to meet at Altitude, an upscale restaurant in downtown Denver, known for its discretion and private dining rooms. As I hung up, I wondered what Will had told Reeves, and what the TechForce CEO's motivations were for meeting me separately. At 2 p.m., Will and I stood awkwardly side by side in the main conference room as employees filed in. Despite everything, we managed to present a professionally unified message. The merger negotiations were paused for 2 weeks for additional financial review. All operations would continue normally, and employees should direct any external inquiries to our communications team. Will was smooth and reassuring, every inch the charismatic CEO. I kept my comments brief and factual, focusing on continuity and stability. Neither of us mentioned the real reasons behind the pause or made any reference to our personal situation. It was a masterclass in corporate theater, presenting a calm, controlled facade while underneath, a brutal power struggle continued. After the announcement, I returned to my office to prepare for my dinner with Jonathan Reeves. This meeting could be pivotal, either an opportunity to advocate for my position or a trap set by Will. Either way, I needed to be ready. Olivia appeared in my doorway as I was reviewing TechForce's latest quarterly report. "What are you wearing tonight?" she asked without preamble. I looked up, confused. "For dinner with Reeves? I figured I'd stay in this." I gestured to my charcoal suit. She shook her head emphatically. "Absolutely not. This is power play territory. We're going shopping." "Olivia, I don't have time." "Make time. This dinner is crucial, and like it or not, optics matter. Will always shows up perfectly dressed for the occasion. It's part of how he commands a room. Tonight, you need to do the same." She was right, of course. Will understood. The psychology of business interactions down to the smallest detail, including the impact of appearance. For 25 years, I'd been the practical one, the behind-the-scenes operator who made things work while he handled the impressions and relationships. Now I needed to play the whole game. 2 hours later, I was in a fitting room at Neiman, Marcus with Olivia passing me options. We settled on a deep burgundy sheath dress with a subtle but distinctive black blazer, professional but confident, memorable without being flashy. "Perfect," Olivia declared. "You look like someone who knows exactly what she's worth." As I changed back into my work clothes, Olivia's phone buzzed. She checked it, her expression changing. "What is it?" I asked. "Office grapevine. We'll just left with Natalie for what's supposedly a client meeting. But get this, they're going to Altitude." My stomach tightened. "The same restaurant where I'm meeting Reeves." "Exactly. No way that's a coincidence." Will was orchestrating a run-in, probably hoping to throw me off balance before my meeting with Reeves. It was manipulative, but also predictable. Will. had always preferred controlling the environment of important negotiations. "Let him play his games," I said, a calm determination settling over me. "It doesn't change anything." But as Olivia and I parted ways outside the store, she gripped my arm. "Be careful, Rebecca. Will's backed into a corner now, and he's never been good at losing." "Neither have I," I reminded her with a small smile. "He's just never seen that side of me before." I went home to shower and change, trying to focus my thoughts before the crucial meeting. As I was getting ready, Emma called. "Mom, is it true you and Dad are fighting over the company?" Tyler's roommate saw something in the business section of the Post's website. I sighed, sitting on the edge of my bed. "It's complicated, honey. We have different views on how the merger should proceed." "But you're not, trying to hurt each other's careers, right?" The worry in her voice was palpable. "I'm trying to protect what I've spent 20 years building," I said carefully, "and making sure I'm treated fairly in the process. Your father and I may disagree about business matters, but we both still care about MCG and its future." After reassuring her as best I could, I finished getting ready, the conversation weighing on me. Emma and Tyler were caught in the middle of this corporate battle, just as they were caught in the middle of our personal one. I needed to remember that, regardless of what happened with Will and the company, they would always be our shared priority. I arrived at altitude promptly at 7, purposely entering through the restaurant's less prominent side entrance. The maitre d' led me to a private dining area in the back, where Jonathan Reeves was already waiting. Reeves was younger than I expected, mid-40s perhaps, with the lean physique of a distance runner and shrewd eyes behind fashionable glasses. He stood as I entered, offering a firm handshake. "Ms. Mitchell, thank you for making time on such short notice. Please call me Rebecca, and I appreciate the invitation. It's always good to have direct communication in situations like this." We exchanged pleasantries as the waiter poured water and wine, both of us tacitly agreeing to delay business talk until we were truly private. Once our orders were placed and the waiter had departed, Reeves leaned forward. "I'll be direct. Rebecca." When TechForce began exploring acquisition of Mitchell Consulting Group, we were impressed by the company's growth, client roster, and market position. What we're less impressed by is the current instability. "I understand your concern," I replied evenly, though I'd characterize it as a necessary correction rather than instability. Certain aspects of the merger negotiation were handled without proper disclosure and transparency. Reeves nodded slowly. "William suggested as much, though his interpretation differs from yours, I imagine." "I'm sure it does. May I ask what specifically he told you?" "That there was a disagreement about valuation and equity treatment, complicated by your ongoing divorce proceedings." Reeves took a sip of his wine. He did not, however, mention the separate retention agreements until I asked directly. "Interesting. Will had at least been smart enough not to lie outright to the TechForce CEO. "And what's your view on those agreements?" I asked. "Retention is standard in acquisitions," Reeves acknowledged. The scale and structure of these particular arrangements, however, raised questions, especially when paired with what appears to be an overall valuation that might not reflect MCG's true market position. He was being diplomatic, but his message was clear. TechForce recognized the potential impropriety. "Mr. Reeves," "Jonathan, please." "Jonathan, what exactly are you looking for from this merger?" TechForce is acquiring a company with strong financials, excellent client relationships, and a proven track record. But you're also potentially acquiring a leadership team that's demonstrated questionable ethics. I'm curious how you reconcile those things. Reeves studied me thoughtfully before answering. "What we're acquiring is capability, market position, and intellectual property. Leadership can be adjusted as needed." The implication hung in the air between us. TechForce. wasn't necessarily committed to keeping Will and Rob in their roles long-term, despite the retention agreements. "And where do you see me in this equation?" I asked directly. "That depends," Reeves replied. "What do you want, Rebecca? To block the merger entirely? To secure a better financial position? Or something else?" It was the same question James had asked me earlier. What did I truly want from this situation? "I want recognition of my contribution to building MCG," I said. "Financial recognition, yes, but also structural. I want a meaningful role in the merged entity, at least through transition. And I want assurance that the company culture we've built, one of integrity and excellence, continues." Reeves nodded, seeming to appreciate my candor. "Those are reasonable objectives, compatible with our interests, provided we can move forward relatively quickly and without public acrimony." Our conversation was interrupted by raised voices from the main dining room. I recognized one immediately, Will. He appeared to be arguing with the maitre d', who was blocking his access to the private dining areas. "Seems we have company," Reeves observed dryly. "My apologies," I said. "This is not a coincidence." Will finally spotted us through the partially open door and strode over, Natalie trailing uncomfortably behind him. He'd clearly had a few drinks already, his usual careful composure slipping. "Jonathan?" he greeted Reeves with forced joviality. "I didn't realize you were in Denver already. We could have arranged a proper meeting." Reeves stood, his expression professionally neutral. "William, this actually is a proper meeting. Rebecca and I were discussing the merger structure." Will's gaze shifted to me, eyes narrowing slightly as he took in my appearance. "I see. Well, perhaps Natalie and I should join you. Make it a complete conversation." "I believe we were nearly finished," I said smoothly, looking to Reeves for confirmation. He nodded. "Indeed. We've covered the essential points, and I have all I need for now." Will's jaw tightened, but he maintained his smile. "At least let me buy you a drink at the bar, Jonathan. We can catch up informally." Reeves glanced at his watch. "Another time, perhaps. I have an early flight back to San Francisco tomorrow." He turned to me. "Rebecca, thank you for your time and candor. My team will be in touch within the week with some revised thoughts on the merger structure." We shook hands, and Reeves nodded politely to Will and Natalie before departing. The three of us stood in awkward silence for a moment. "Enjoying yourself, Rebecca?" Will finally asked, voice laced with resentment. "Going behind my back to TechForce? You mean exactly what you tried to do to me with the side agreements?" I countered. "Besides, Reeves called me, not the other way around." Will scoffed. "And I'm sure you were nothing but fair and balanced in your assessment of the situation." I was truthful. "Something you might try occasionally." Natalie shifted uncomfortably beside Will, clearly wishing to be anywhere but here. I almost felt sorry for her. Young, ambitious, caught in the crossfire of a disintegrating marriage and business partnership. Almost. "This isn't over," Will said, voice low. "You may have bought yourself some time with that stunt in the board meeting, but the merger is still happening. TechForce wants MCG, with or without you." I gathered my purse, suddenly tired of the confrontation. "You're right about one thing, Will. This isn't over. But it's not going to end the way you planned either." As I walked past them toward the exit, I heard Natalie whisper, "Was that really necessary, Will?" I didn't hear his response, but I didn't need to. The Will Mitchell I'd known for 25 years was unraveling. His carefully constructed plans disrupted, his usual control slipping, and that made him more dangerous than ever. Outside the restaurant, I took a deep breath of the cool evening air, sensing that I'd just passed some invisible tipping point. My dinner with Reeves had confirmed what I'd suspected. TechForce wasn't necessarily committed to Will's vision of the merger. There was room to negotiate, to reshape the deal in a way that recognized my value. But Will wouldn't accept that easily. The next 2 weeks would be a high-stakes battle for the future of the company we'd built together, and for my own future beyond the shadow of William Mitchell. My phone buzzed with a text from Olivia. "How did it go?" I smiled grimly as I replied, "Will showed up as expected, but Reeves is open to negotiation. The real fight starts now." The morning air felt different as I walked into Mitchell Consulting Group's headquarters exactly 1 week after my dinner with Jonathan Reeves. The office atmosphere had shifted subtly. Employees still lowered their voices when I passed, but now they offered small smiles or nods, a quiet acknowledgement that I wasn't being pushed out as easily as Will had planned. "Morning, Rebecca," called Lisa Chen, the finance director who had refused the interim CFO position. "The quarterly projection models are ready for your review whenever you have time." "Thank you, Lisa. I'll take a look this afternoon." In my office, I found a package waiting on my desk, thick documents in a TechForce-branded envelope. I opened. It carefully defined revised merger terms, clearly sent directly to me rather than through Will. As I flipped through the pages, I couldn't help the small smile that formed on my lips. The new structure was significantly different: a fair market valuation for MCG's assets, equal treatment of all shareholder classes, and most importantly, a formal role for me in the merged organization. Chief Integration Officer, responsible for blending the financial systems of both companies. My phone rang. James Collins. "I just received the revised terms from TechForce," I told him. "They're surprisingly favorable." "I did too," James replied. "It seems your dinner with Reeves was productive. But Rebecca, be careful. Will's been unusually quiet this past week. That makes me nervous." He was right. After our confrontation, at altitude, Will had retreated to a strange professional politeness, keeping our interactions minimal and strictly business-related. No more attempts to force me out. No more emergency board meetings. It was suspicious. "I've been thinking the same thing," I admitted. "Have you heard anything through your channels?" "Nothing specific, but there's been activity at Hargrove's. Firm. Multiple associates working late, couriers coming and going. They're preparing something." "The 2-week truce ends in 3 days," I noted. "Maybe they're waiting to make their move then." "Perhaps. In the meantime, I've been researching TechForce's previous acquisitions. There's something interesting you should know. In 3 of their last 5 deals, they ended up replacing the acquired company's executive team within a year, despite initial retention agreements." I considered this information. "So Reeves says one thing to secure the deal, then does another once the papers are signed?" "It's a pattern worth noting," James confirmed. "The revised terms may look good, but what happens after the merger is equally important." "I'll keep that in mind. What's our next move?" "Review the terms thoroughly. Then we should meet with Reeves directly again. Both of us this time. I want contractual guarantees about your role, not just promises." After hanging up, I dove into the revised merger documents, making notes and identifying questions. I was deeply focused when Olivia burst into my office without knocking, her face flushed with urgency. "Rebecca, you need to see this." She placed her tablet in front of me, open to a financial news site. The headline made my blood run cold. "Mitchell Consulting Group faces federal inquiry over financial discrepancies." I quickly scanned the article. An anonymous source had alerted the SEC to potential financial irregularities at MCG, specifically related to our handling of certain client billing practices. The article mentioned that federal investigators had requested documents from the company. "This is the first I'm hearing of any federal inquiry," I said, my mind racing. As CFO, I should have been immediately informed of such a serious matter. "That's because it just happened this morning," Olivia explained. "Marcus received the document request about an hour ago and went straight to Will. I only know because my department needs to prepare some of the HR records they're asking for." I stood up, anger rising. "And no one thought to inform the chief financial officer about a financial investigation?" Marcus was looking for you, but Will told him he'd handle it. Olivia's expression was grim. Rebecca, the records they're asking for mostly relate to billing protocols you implemented 3 years ago for our healthcare clients. My stomach dropped. Those protocols had been carefully designed to navigate the complex regulatory environment of healthcare IT consulting. We'd worked with outside counsel to ensure compliance, but the systems were intricate and could appear irregular to outside eyes if not properly explained. "This isn't a coincidence," I said quietly. "The timing is too perfect." Olivia nodded. I thought the same thing. Will's been too quiet, too cooperative. He was planning something else. I grabbed my phone to call James, but before I could dial, my office door opened again. This time it was Marcus Hendricks, looking deeply uncomfortable. "Rebecca, we need to talk." "About the SEC inquiry that no one bothered to tell me about?" I asked sharply. Marcus winced. "I was coming to find you, but Will insisted on reviewing the document request first. He thought it would be better coming from him." "Where is he now?" "Conference room C with Victoria Hargrove and someone from her firm's white-collar practice." Of course. Will was already positioning himself with legal counsel specializing in federal investigations. I stood up, gathering my laptop. "I'm joining that meeting. Now." Marcus and Olivia exchanged glances. "Rebecca," Marcus said carefully, "there's something else you should know. The SEC specifically mentioned your role in designing the billing protocols under scrutiny." I froze. "They're targeting me personally?" "The document request focuses heavily on your involvement, yes. Will is suggesting that as CFO, you should temporarily step back from financial oversight until the matter is resolved." The strategy became crystal clear. Will couldn't force me out through normal corporate channels, so he'd manufactured a crisis that would require me to recuse myself from financial matters, effectively neutralizing my power as CFO, just as the merger negotiations entered their final stage. "Did Will make an anonymous tip to the SEC?" I asked bluntly. Marcus looked genuinely shocked. I don't know. I wouldn't think he'd go that far. But I knew better. Will Mitchell would absolutely go that far if it meant winning. The question was whether he'd fabricated evidence or merely presented legitimate practices in a misleading light. Either way, the damage was real. "I need to speak with James immediately," I said, "and then I'm joining that meeting." After Marcus left, I quickly filled Olivia in on the TechForce revised terms and what James had discovered about their post-acquisition patterns. "So much for your clean victory," she sighed. "Will must have realized he was losing on the merger front and decided to change tactics." "He's playing dirty now," I agreed. "But so can I." I called James, explaining the situation in terse sentences. His response was immediate and firm. "Don't say anything to anyone until I get there. This is a serious escalation, and every word matters now. I'll be there in 30 minutes. While waiting for James, I pulled up all documentation related to the healthcare billing protocols in question. I had been meticulous in their development, knowing the regulatory scrutiny healthcare clients faced. Every decision had been documented, every compliance check recorded. If Will was using this to undermine me, he'd chosen poorly, unless he'd somehow altered records. That thought stopped me cold. Would Will go so far as to tamper with company documents? A week ago, I would have said no without hesitation. Now, I wasn't so sure. James arrived in record time, slightly out of breath from rushing. "Let's talk in private," he insisted, glancing at Olivia. "No offense, but—" "Attorney-client. Privilege," she finished for him. "I get it. I'll keep an eye on Will's meeting. Text if you need anything." Once we were alone, James got straight to the point. "This is a calculated move to sideline you at a critical moment. The question is whether it's based on legitimate concerns that are being weaponized, or if Will has crossed the line into actual misconduct." I'm certain the billing protocols themselves are proper, I said. We had outside counsel review them, and they've been in place for years without issue. Then we focus on the timing and targeting, James decided. We don't deny the need for an investigation. That would look defensive. Instead, we emphasize your commitment to transparency and proper procedure. We quickly formulated a strategy, then headed to conference room C. Inside, Will sat at the head of the table with Victoria Hargrove and a sharp-looking man in his 50s who I assumed was the white-collar specialist. Rob was there too, looking uncomfortable, along with Marcus and two members of our finance team. Will's expression tightened when he saw James beside me. "Rebecca, I was about to come find you. We're discussing the SEC inquiry." "So I heard," I replied evenly, taking a seat directly across from him. Strangely, no one thought to inform the CFO immediately when financial documents were requested by federal regulators. Victoria Hargrove interjected smoothly. "We were just formulating the best approach before bringing you into the conversation. Ms. Mitchell, given that the protocols under examination were designed under your direct supervision, there are certain complications." "You mean conflicts of interest?" the white-collar specialist added. "Gerald Weiss, by the way." He offered his hand, which I didn't take. "The only conflict of interest I see," I replied coldly, "is a CEO who fails to notify his CFO of a financial investigation while simultaneously trying to force her out of the company during merger negotiations." Will's jaw tightened. "That's not what's happening here, isn't it? The timing seems remarkably convenient, Will. Just as TechForce sends revised merger terms that maintain my position, suddenly there's a federal inquiry focused specifically on systems I implemented." Gerald Weiss leaned forward. "Ms. Mitchell, regardless of your suspicions about timing, the SEC inquiry is very real. The company has a legal obligation to respond thoroughly and promptly. And as CFO, I have every intention of ensuring we do exactly that," I replied. "I designed those protocols with full documentation and legal review. They comply with all applicable regulations, and you shouldn't object to stepping aside temporarily while the investigation proceeds," Will said. "It's standard procedure when an executive is under scrutiny." James spoke for the first time. "There is nothing standard about this situation. Mr. Mitchell, my client has not been accused of any wrongdoing. The SEC has simply requested documents, which is routine in regulated industries." Victoria Hargrove pursed her lips. "Nevertheless, governance best practices would suggest," James interrupted, "that when federal regulators request information, the company provides it transparently and completely, not that they immediately sideline executives without cause." The room fell silent for a moment. I studied Will's face, noting the subtle signs of stress around his eyes. This maneuver was calculated, but he wasn't entirely comfortable with it. That told me something important. He might not have initiated the SEC inquiry himself. Perhaps he'd just learned about it and was opportunistically using it against me. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, breaking the silence. "As CFO, I will personally oversee the compilation of all requested documents, with full transparency to the board and our general counsel. I will not step aside, as there is no legitimate reason for me to do so. And if anyone attempts to exclude me from this process or the ongoing merger discussions, I will be forced to conclude that this inquiry is being manipulated for personal advantage, something I'm sure the SEC would find interesting." Will's expression darkened. "Are you threatening me, Rebecca?" "I'm stating facts. You've been trying to force me out for weeks, Will. First by demanding my resignation, then through board maneuvers, and now through this conveniently timed inquiry. It establishes a pattern that doesn't reflect well on your motives." Victoria Hargrove and Gerald Weiss exchanged glances. Marcus looked increasingly uncomfortable. "Perhaps," Marcus suggested carefully, "we could take a middle path. Rebecca remains involved but partners with Lisa Chen to compile the documentation, ensuring an additional layer of review? James nodded slightly, indicating this was an acceptable compromise. My client would be amenable to that, provided she maintains full access and oversight. Will seemed about to object when his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then looked up with renewed confidence. We'll continue this discussion later. I've just been informed that Jonathan Reeves has arrived for an unscheduled visit. He's waiting in the main conference room. My pulse quickened. Why would the TechForce CEO show up unannounced? Had he heard about the SEC inquiry already? We should both meet with him, I suggested. Will shook his head. I think it's better if I speak with him first, given the current situation. You can join us afterward. Before I could protest, he was already heading for the door. Victoria Hargrove, following close behind. James placed a restraining hand on my arm as I moved to follow. Let them go, he murmured. We need to understand what's happening before we engage. After they left, I turned to Marcus. What exactly did the SEC request? I want to see the full document. Marcus hesitated, then slid a folder across the table. This is the complete request. It came by courier this morning. I read through it carefully, James looking over my shoulder. The language was typical government bureaucratese, but the focus was clear. Detailed examination of how we allocated development costs across multiple healthcare clients, particularly when similar systems were implemented for different organizations. This is about cost sharing, I realized. They're questioning whether we properly allocated development expenses across clients. James nodded. A nuanced compliance area, but hardly scandalous if you followed standard accounting practices. We did, I confirmed. Every allocation was documented and justified. But explaining the methodology to someone unfamiliar with healthcare IT consulting could be challenging. Marcus looked relieved. So there's nothing improper? Nothing whatsoever. But it could look concerning without proper context, which I suspect is exactly what Will is counting on. I turned to Lisa Chen, who had been silent throughout the meeting. Lisa, I need you to pull together all documentation on our healthcare. Client billing protocols from 2020 to present. Every approval, every compliance review, every allocation decision. She nodded. Already started, Rebecca. I've also asked Tommy in IT to secure the access logs for those files, to see who's been reviewing them recently. I smiled gratefully. Perfect thinking. As Lisa and the finance team left to begin gathering documentation, I turned to James. We need to find out what Reeves is doing here. Agreed, but we can't appear desperate or defensive. Let's give Will his meeting, then approach Reeves directly. Olivia texted me. Reeves just arrived with 2 TF execs. Looks serious. Will took them to the executive conference room. I showed James the message. I don't like this. If Reeves heard about the SEC inquiry, he might be reconsidering the revised terms. Or, James suggested, he might have other concerns entirely. Let's not jump to conclusions. We spent the next 20 minutes strategizing while monitoring the situation through Olivia's updates. Finally, she texted, They're wrapping up. Will looking too pleased with himself. Time to make our move, I decided. James and I headed to the executive conference room, arriving just as Will, Victoria, and the TechForce contingent were exiting. Jonathan Reeves spotted me immediately. Rebecca, he acknowledged with a nod. I was just asking about you. Will interjected smoothly. I explained that Rebecca is dealing with an unfortunate regulatory matter that requires her immediate attention. I met Reeves's gaze directly. I'd be happy to discuss that with you personally, Jonathan. It's being significantly mischaracterized. Something flashed in Reeves's eyes. Interest, perhaps, or suspicion. Actually, I'd appreciate that. Do you have a few minutes now? Will's smile faltered slightly. Jonathan, We were just about to continue our discussion over lunch at— Lunch can wait, Reeves interrupted. I'd like to hear Rebecca's perspective. Victoria Hargrove touched Will's arm lightly. Perhaps we should give them some time to talk. We can use the delay to review those projection models you mentioned. Will had no choice but to agree, though his expression made clear his displeasure. As they departed, Reeves gestured toward the conference room. Shall we? Inside, Reeves introduced his colleagues, TechForce's General Counsel and Chief Strategy Officer, then got straight to the point. Will informed me about an SEC inquiry into MCG's financial practices. Given that we're in the final stages of merger negotiations, this raises obvious concerns. I understand completely, I replied. And I want to assure you that the inquiry involves routine documentation of cost allocation methodologies in healthcare IT projects, an area with complex compliance requirements but one where MCG has always maintained rigorous standards. I explained the nature of the billing protocols in question, emphasizing the documentation and legal review that had accompanied their implementation. James added context about the commonplace nature of such information requests in regulated industries. Reeves listened attentively, occasionally glancing at his general counsel, who nodded at key points in our explanation. And the timing of this inquiry? Reeves asked finally. Just as we're finalizing revised merger terms, Will suggested it might indicate deeper issues that had been overlooked. The implication was clear. Will was suggesting I had concealed financial problems. The timing is certainly interesting, I acknowledged, particularly as it coincides with my refusal to be pushed out of the company I co-founded, and my discovery of undisclosed side agreements that Will negotiated during the merger process. TechForce's General Counsel leaned forward. Ms. Mitchell, are you suggesting the SEC inquiry might be related to internal company politics? James answered carefully. We're not suggesting anything improper regarding the SEC's actions. However, the timing and focus of the inquiry, and more importantly, how it's being characterized within MCG, raises legitimate questions about whether certain parties are attempting to leverage a routine regulatory matter for personal advantage. Reeves and his colleagues exchanged glances. Then Reeves turned back to me. Rebecca, I appreciate your candor. When we revised the merger terms to include a role for you in the combined organization, it was based on our assessment of your value to MCG and potentially to TechForce. That assessment hasn't changed. Relief flooded through me. Thank you, Jonathan. However, he continued, we can't proceed with any merger while regulatory questions remain unresolved. The revised terms included a standard contingency for clean regulatory status. And there it was, Will's strategy. He couldn't stop TechForce from offering me a fair deal, but he could trigger contingency clauses that would delay the merger until I was effectively sidelined. How long a delay are you considering? James asked. Until the SEC matter is resolved or at least clarified, TechForce's General Counsel replied. Likely 60 to 90 days minimum, 3 months, more than enough time for Will to consolidate, power and undermine my position completely. What if, I suggested, we could provide comprehensive documentation addressing the SEC's questions within a week? Would that mitigate your concerns sufficiently to proceed with the current timeline? Reeves looked skeptical. That's an ambitious time frame for responding to federal regulators. The advantage of meticulous record-keeping, I replied with confidence I didn't entirely feel. We have nothing to hide and everything documented. 1 week is realistic. TechForce's General Counsel still looked doubtful, but Reeves seemed intrigued by my determination. All right, he said finally. 1 week. If you can provide satisfactory documentation addressing the SEC's concerns by then, we'll maintain the current merger timeline. If not, we implement the regulatory delay provision. After they left, James looked at me with raised eyebrows. 1 week? That's going to be challenging. It's our only option, I replied. Will is counting on delay to regain control. We can't give him that time. The rest of the day passed in a whirlwind of activity. I assembled a tiger team of our best finance and compliance people, including Lisa Chen, explaining the situation directly. We had 1 week to compile comprehensive documentation addressing the SEC's questions, or the merger, and potentially my position, would be jeopardized. To their credit, every person agreed to help, even knowing it might put them at odds with Will. Many had been with MCG for years and remembered how instrumental I'd been in building the company from nothing. That loyalty was something Will had always taken for granted. By evening, we had a war room set up in one of the large conference rooms, walls covered with timeline charts and document indices. Lisa's earlier request to IT had yielded interesting results. Someone had accessed the healthcare billing protocol files 2 weeks ago using Will's credentials, around the time he'd been unusually quiet after our confrontation at altitude. It doesn't prove he contacted the SEC, James cautioned when I showed him the logs, but it establishes that he was examining these specific protocols before the inquiry materialized. It's enough to establish motive and opportunity, I replied, though proving it isn't our primary concern right now. As everyone else gradually headed home for the night, promising to return early the next day, I remained in the war room, reviewing files and making notes. Around 10, the door opened, and Will stood there, surveying the operation we'd set up. "Impressive mobilization," he commented, though ultimately futile. I didn't look up from my laptop. "If you've come to gloat, I'm rather busy." He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "I'm not gloating, Rebecca. I'm offering you a way out." That got my attention. I looked up, studying his face. He seemed tired but resolute. "What kind of way out?" "A graceful one." He sat down across from me. "The SEC inquiry isn't going away. Even if you manage to satisfy TechForce's immediate concerns, the investigation will continue. It could take months, possibly longer." "There's nothing to find," I said confidently. "The protocols were properly designed and implemented." "Perhaps, but investigations have a way of expanding. Questions lead to more questions. And while it continues, your position becomes increasingly untenable." "Get to the point, Will." He leaned forward. "Resign as CFO. Accept a generous severance package and a clean break from MCG. In return, I'll make sure the merger includes a fair valuation of your equity stake. You walk away wealthy, reputation intact, free to start the next chapter without the cloud of a federal investigation." I stared at him, genuinely surprised by the offer. It was more conciliatory than I'd expected, which immediately made me suspicious. Why now? Why not just let the investigation play out if you're so confident it will undermine me? Will sighed, suddenly looking every one of his 53 years. "Because this has already gone too far. The company is suffering. Employees are distracted. Clients are asking questions, and TechForce is getting nervous. A clean break is better for everyone." "Including you and Natalie," I observed. He didn't deny it. "Yes, including us, but also including you, Rebecca. Do you really want to spend the next 6 months fighting a battle that will drain you emotionally and potentially damage the professional reputation you've spent decades building?" It was a compelling argument, and for a moment, I considered it. A clean break, financial security, freedom from the daily pain of seeing Will and Natalie together, a chance to start fresh. But then I thought about what it would mean to walk away from MCG, not just financially, but symbolically. 20 years of my life, my identity, my accomplishment, reduced to a severance package. "No," I said finally, "I won't resign. Not because of an investigation into protocols I know were properly implemented. Not because of a merger I helped make possible. And certainly not because it would make your life with Natalie more comfortable. Will's expression hardened. This isn't about comfort, Rebecca. It's about reality. You can't win this fight. Maybe not, I acknowledged. But I can make damn sure you don't win it either. He stood, shaking his head. I tried to give you a dignified exit. Remember that in the weeks ahead. After he left, I sat in the silent conference room, turning our conversation over in my mind. Will's offer had seemed genuine, but something about it nagged at me. It was too reasonable, too generous, given how hard he'd fought to push me out completely just weeks ago. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma. Mom, just checking in. You okay? Haven't heard from you today. The simple message pulled me back from strategic calculations to the personal reality of what I was fighting for. Not just money or position, but something more fundamental. Recognition of my value and worth, both professionally and personally. The very thing Will had denied me in our marriage and was trying to erase from our company. I texted back. Long day at work. I'm okay. Love you. Her response was immediate. Love you more. Don't work too hard. The next morning arrived too quickly. I'd gone home for just a few hours of sleep before returning to the office, where the Tiger team was already reassembling. Lisa Chen approached as soon as I walked in, her expression concerned. Rebecca, there's something you need to see. She handed me a folder containing printouts of email exchanges from 3 years earlier, discussions about the healthcare billing protocols when they were first being implemented. I scanned them quickly, then more carefully, my concern growing with each page. The emails showed a detailed debate between finance team members about how certain development costs should be allocated. I remembered the discussion well. We'd ultimately opted for the most conservative approach, allocating costs based on usage rather than a flat distribution that would have been more favorable to our profit margins. But these emails had been altered. Subtle changes to language made it appear that I had advocated for the less conservative approach and had been overruled by others, the exact opposite of what had actually happened. Where did you find these? I asked, keeping my voice level despite the anger building inside me. They were in the folder Marcus gave legal for the SEC response, Lisa explained. I noticed the discrepancies because I was copied on the original exchange. I pulled our archived copies from IT's backup server to compare. She handed me another folder. These are the originals. I placed the two sets of emails side by side, the alterations obvious when directly compared. This wasn't just Will using the SEC inquiry opportunistically, this was active tampering with evidence. Who had access to these files? I asked. According to IT logs, they were accessed and modified 2 weeks ago using an admin credential, Lisa replied. The system can't identify exactly who, but it had to be someone with high-level access. Will, or someone acting on his behalf, had crossed a line I hadn't thought even he would cross. This wasn't business maneuvering anymore. It was potentially criminal. I immediately called James, explaining what we'd found. This changes everything, he said gravely. Document tampering to mislead federal regulators is extremely serious. We need to approach this carefully. What's our next step? I asked. First, secure the evidence. Both the altered documents and the originals, plus the IT logs showing when they were changed. Second, we need to consider who to approach first. Marcus as general counsel, the board, or potentially the SEC directly. If we go to Marcus, Will might intercept the information, I pointed out. True, but going outside the company first carries its own risks. Let me think this through and call you back. I hung up, trying to process the implications. Will had backed himself into a corner where his only escape route involved tampering with company records. A desperate move from a man who had always prided himself on his strategic brilliance. What had driven him to this point? Simple greed? Fear of losing control? Or something deeper? Perhaps the realization that the company he thought of as his creation might continue successfully without him. Before I could pursue that line of thought, Olivia burst into the room. "Emergency board meeting in 30 minutes, she announced, slightly out of breath. "Will just called it. Everyone's scrambling to rearrange schedules. What's the agenda?" I asked, though I could guess. "Officially, addressing regulatory concerns and leadership continuity. Unofficially?" She lowered her voice. "Word is he's making a move to suspend you immediately, citing new evidence of impropriety. The altered emails. Will was planning to use the doctored documents to force my suspension before I could expose the tampering." "Where's James?" Olivia asked, looking around. "On his way," I assured her, though I wasn't certain. "I need you to do something important. Find Lisa Chen and have her make copies of both sets of emails, the originals and the altered versions. Keep them somewhere safe, away from the office." Olivia nodded, understanding immediately. Evidence preservation. Got it. As she left, my phone rang, James returning my call. "I've consulted with a colleague who specializes in SEC matters," he said without preamble. "Given the document tampering, we need to move quickly. Will has escalated to a level that forces our hand." "He's called an emergency board meeting in 30 minutes, I informed him. "Apparently to suspend me based on new evidence." James cursed under his breath. "I'm 15 minutes away. Stall if you can, but don't confront him about the tampering until I'm there. This has crossed from corporate politics into potential criminal territory." The next half hour passed in a blur of preparation. I gathered as much documentation as I could, including the IT logs showing when the files had been modified. Lisa and Olivia secured copies of the crucial emails off-site. By the time James arrived, slightly disheveled from rushing, I felt as prepared as possible for the confrontation ahead. Together, we walked to the boardroom. Will was already there with Victoria Hargrove, Gerald Weiss, and Rob, Marcus Hendricks. Sat apart, looking increasingly uncomfortable with his position caught between warring executives. "Rebecca," Will acknowledged with forced professionalism. "I'm glad you could make time for this important discussion." "I wouldn't miss it," I replied evenly, taking my seat. "Though I'm curious about the urgency, given our agreement to focus on responding to the SEC inquiry this week." Will exchanged glances with Gerald Weiss before responding. "New information has come to light that necessitates immediate action. Information that significantly changes our understanding of the situation." "What information would that be?" James asked innocently. Gerald Weiss opened a folder, removing several printed emails, the altered versions Lisa had identified. "These communications from 2020 indicate that Ms. Mitchell personally advocated for questionable cost allocation practices, despite concerns raised by her staff. If these were the protocols implemented, they would represent a serious compliance." "House?" Marcus frowned, reaching for the documents. "I haven't seen these before. They were recently located during our document gathering process," Will explained smoothly. "They had been archived in a secondary storage system." I glanced at James, who gave a subtle nod. It was time. "Actually," I said calmly, "those documents have been altered." The room fell silent. "That's a serious accusation," Victoria Hargrove said, her voice sharp. "It is," I agreed, "and I can prove it." I opened my own folder, removing the original emails and the IT logs. These are the original communications, verified against our secure backup server. As you can see, they show the exact opposite of what the altered versions suggest. I advocated for the most conservative approach, not against it. I handed the documents to Marcus, who read them with increasing concern. "These appear to be the same email exchanges, but with substantively different content in key areas." "Exactly," I confirmed. "And these IT logs show that the altered versions were created 2 weeks ago, using an administrative credential that only a few people in the company possess." Will's face had gone pale, but he maintained his composure. "This is absurd. You're manufacturing evidence to protect yourself. Gerald Weiss, however, was eyeing the documents with growing alarm. As a white-collar specialist, he undoubtedly recognized the seriousness of document tampering in a federal inquiry. Whether these documents were altered is a technical question. That can be definitively established, James noted. What's more concerning is the intent to use altered documents to mislead both the board and potentially federal regulators. Victoria Hargrove leaned over to whisper urgently to Will, who shook his head slightly. Marcus looked up from the documents. As general counsel, I have an ethical obligation to investigate this matter immediately. If company records have indeed been tampered with, particularly in relation to a federal inquiry, that represents a significant legal issue. I suggest we adjourn this meeting, James proposed, until Mr. Hendricks can verify the authenticity of these documents. Meanwhile, all parties should refrain from any further action regarding Ms. Mitchell's position or the SEC inquiry. Will looked like he wanted to object, but Gerald Weiss placed a restraining hand on his arm, murmuring something I couldn't hear. After a tense moment, Will nodded stiffly. Fine. We'll reconvene once Marcus has completed his review. As the meeting broke up, I noticed Rob lingering behind, looking troubled. When the others had left, he approached me hesitantly. Rebecca, I need to talk to you, privately. James gave me a questioning look. I nodded reassuringly. It's okay. I'll meet you in my office. When we were alone, Rob sank into a chair, suddenly looking much older than his early 50s. I didn't know about the document tampering, he said quietly. You have to believe that. But you knew about the SEC tip, I guessed. He nodded reluctantly. Will said it was just a way to delay things, to give us leverage in renegotiating the merger terms. He never mentioned anything about altering documents. Why are you telling me this? Rob sighed heavily. Because this has gone too far. Will's not thinking clearly anymore. He's obsessed with pushing you out, with winning at any cost. And now he's crossed a line that could have serious consequences for everyone involved, including me. Including you, I agreed, as Will's partner in the retention agreements and the merger negotiations. I never wanted things to get ugly, Rebecca. I just wanted the merger to go through. TechForce is offering life-changing money, and at my age. He trailed off, looking embarrassed. A month later, I stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of my new office, watching the Denver skyline as sunset painted the buildings in gold and purple. The view was different from my old office at Mitchell Consulting Group, higher, with a broader perspective of the city and mountains beyond. In many ways, it reflected my new position perfectly. The nameplate on my door now read, Rebecca Mitchell, Chief Executive Officer. Not of MCG, which no longer existed as an independent entity, but of TechForce Healthcare Solutions, the new division created specifically to house MCG's healthcare consulting business within the larger TechForce organization. The past 30 days had unfolded in ways I could never have predicted. After Rob's confession and the discovery of the altered documents, events had accelerated rapidly. Marcus Hendricks, fulfilling his ethical obligations as general counsel, had conducted an immediate investigation, confirming that the documents had indeed been tampered with using Will's credentials. Confronted with this evidence and Rob's testimony about the SEC tip, Will had faced a devastating choice: resign voluntarily or face potential criminal charges for obstruction of justice and securities fraud. For once in his life, William Mitchell had been forced to accept defeat. He resigned from MCG 3 weeks ago, taking a significantly reduced severance package negotiated by Victoria Hargrove, who proved surprisingly reasonable once she understood the full extent of Will's actions. Natalie had resigned the same day, though whether out of loyalty to Will or simple self-preservation, I never discovered. Last I heard, they had relocated to Phoenix, ironically the very city Will had suggested I retreat to when he was attempting to push me out. The merger with TechForce had proceeded, but on completely different terms. Jonathan Reeves, upon learning about the document tampering, had been furious, not at me or MCG as an organization, but at the ethical breach by its CEO. Rather than walk away from the deal entirely, he had proposed a restructuring that preserved MCG's healthcare division as a semi-autonomous unit within TechForce, with me as its chief executive and equity partner. "You built something valuable," he'd told me during those whirlwind negotiations. "Your expertise in healthcare IT consulting is exactly what we need to expand in that sector. This isn't charity. It's good business." Rob had remained with the company in a reduced capacity, his cooperation during the crisis earning him a path to eventual retirement rather than termination. He'd approached me awkwardly on my first day as CEO, offering congratulations that seemed genuine despite everything. "You deserved this all along," he'd admitted. "Will just never could see past his own ambition to recognize yours." A knock at my office door pulled me from my reflections. Emma and Tyler stood there, both smiling. "Surprise inspection," Emma announced, entering with the confidence of her 24 years. "We wanted to see Mom's new domain." I embraced them both, happiness washing through me. "What do you think?" Tyler whistled appreciatively, turning to take in the spacious corner office with its modern furnishings and technology. "Definitely an upgrade from the old place. Better title, too," Emma added, gesturing to my nameplate. "Though honestly, you should have been CEO years ago." "Things happen when they're meant to," I said, surprised to find I actually believed it. "Are we still on for dinner at the new place?" My new place was a contemporary condo in downtown Denver, not the one Will had condescendingly chosen for me, but a space I'd selected myself, with floor-to-ceiling windows similar to my office and a rooftop garden that had become my sanctuary. The house in Cherry Creek, with all its memories both good and painful, had been sold as part of the divorce settlement. "Olivia's meeting us there," Tyler confirmed. "She texted that she's bringing that new guy she's been seeing." "James Collins?" I asked, smiling. The unexpected romance between my best friend and my attorney had been a surprising but delightful development of recent weeks. "That's the one. She says he's cooking something fancy to celebrate your 1-month anniversary as CEO." As we prepared to leave, I took one final glance around my office. On the credenza behind my desk sat a single framed photo. Not of Will and me at some company function, but of Emma and Tyler at their college graduations, flanking me with proud smiles. My real legacy, my true success. My phone buzzed with a text from Olivia. "Hurry up. James made his famous risotto and it waits for no one. Also, we have news." I smiled, replying quickly before gathering my things. Dinner with my children and closest friends awaited, a different kind of success than I'd ever envisioned during those 25 years with Will, but somehow richer and more meaningful. In the elevator descending to the lobby, Emma squeezed my hand. "You seem happy, Mom. Happier than I've seen you in, well, maybe ever." I am happy, I realized, the truth of it settling over me with surprising weight. It turns out there's something incredibly liberating about starting over on your own terms. "Even after everything Dad did?" Tyler asked cautiously. The children had been devastated by Will's betrayal, not just of me, but of the company, values they'd grown up believing in. "Especially after that," I replied. "For 25 years, I defined myself largely in relation to your father, as his wife, his business partner, his support system. Now I get to discover who Rebecca Mitchell really is, on her own." The elevator doors opened to the gleaming lobby of the TechForce building. Through the glass front, I could see the busy Denver street, people hurrying home in the gathering twilight. Once, that sight might have filled me with melancholy. Another day ending with the same routine stretching, endlessly forward. Now it filled me with anticipation for whatever might come next. As we stepped out into the cool evening air, I paused for a moment, taking a deep breath. 6 months ago, I had been comfortably settled in what I thought was a lifetime partnership, planning an anniversary trip for a marriage I believed was solid despite its imperfections. I could never have imagined standing here now, divorced, reinvented, at the helm of my own corporate division. You know what's really ironic? I mused, as we walked toward the parking garage. Will left me for his assistant because he wanted something new, something that made him feel young and important again. But in the end, I'm the one who got a fresh start. Tyler laughed. And from what I hear, Dad's miserable in Phoenix. Natalie apparently hates the heat. That's not our concern anymore, I said, meaning it. Will's happiness or unhappiness no longer affected mine. Perhaps the most profound change of all. At my condo later that evening, surrounded by the people who truly mattered in my life, I raised a glass of champagne. To new beginnings, I toasted. And to karma, Olivia added with a wink, her hand intertwined with James's on the table between them. To Mom, Emma countered, her expression serious despite her smile, for showing us what real strength looks like. As conversation and laughter flowed around my dining table, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. The pain of betrayal had been real and deep, but it had also been transformative, burning away the compromises and accommodations I'd made for years until only my authentic self remained. Will had thought he was escaping to something better when he left me for Natalie. He couldn't have known he was actually setting me free. 2 days later, I sat across from Jonathan Reeves in his office, reviewing the first quarter results for TechForce Healthcare Solutions. The division was outperforming expectations, adding 3 new major clients since the merger. The transition has been remarkably smooth, Jonathan observed. The team seems energized rather than disrupted by the changes. They've been waiting for an opportunity to really shine, I explained. Many of them felt constrained by the previous leadership structure. Jonathan nodded thoughtfully. Speaking of which, I received an interesting email yesterday from William Mitchell. My pulse quickened slightly, but I kept my expression neutral. Oh? He's seeking a consulting position with one of our competitors. They contacted me for a reference. And what did you tell them? Jonathan smiled thinly. That while Mr. Mitchell certainly has extensive industry experience, I couldn't speak to his current capabilities or ethics. Diplomatic, I observed. I thought so. He studied me curiously. Does it bother you, knowing he's trying to rebuild his career in the same industry? I considered the question honestly. No. What Will does now is his own business. I'm focused on my path forward. And it was true. The anger and hurt that had driven me in those first weeks after our separation had gradually transformed into something else. Not forgiveness exactly, but release. Will no longer occupied space in my thoughts or emotions. He had become simply another chapter in my story, not its defining narrative. As I left Jonathan's office, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. I hesitated before answering. Rebecca Mitchell. Ms. Mitchell, this is Stephanie Lawson from the Denver Post. We spoke briefly some months ago. The reporter who had called at the beginning of the MCG drama. I remember. I'm working on a feature about women in leadership positions in Colorado, tech companies, and your recent appointment at TechForce makes you an ideal subject. Would you be interested in an interview? 6 months ago, I might have declined, uncomfortable with the spotlight. Will had always been the public face of MCG, the one who gave interviews and accepted awards. I had been content in the background, believing that was where I belonged. Actually, Ms. Lawson, I would be interested. I think it's an important conversation to have. We scheduled the interview for the following week. As I hung up, I realized how much had changed, not just in my circumstances, but in my perception of myself and my capabilities. The divorce had been finalized 3 days earlier, The legal dissolution of 25 years together reduced to signatures on documents and the division of assets. I had expected to feel something momentous. Grief, perhaps, or at least nostalgia. Instead, I'd felt only a quiet sense of completion, of a chapter properly closed. That evening, I met Olivia for our weekly dinner, this time without James or other company. Over glasses of wine at our favorite small Italian restaurant, she finally asked the question I could tell had been on her mind. "Do you ever miss it? The life you had with Will?" I twirled pasta around my fork, considering. Sometimes I miss the certainty of it, knowing exactly what each day would bring, what was expected of me. There was comfort in that routine, even if it wasn't always fulfilling. "But not enough to want it back," she observed. "Not even close." I smiled, surprised by the clarity of my conviction. I didn't realize how much I'd limited myself until I was forced to stand entirely on my own. It's like I was living in a house with low ceilings, always careful not to reach too high. Now I'm in a space where I can stretch to my full height. Olivia raised her glass. "To stretching to your full height." We clinked glasses and the conversation turned to other topics. Her developing relationship with James, her new role as TechForce's Director of Human Resources, plans for a girls' weekend in Aspen when the busy launch period for our division settled down. As we walked back to our cars after dinner, Olivia linked her arm through mine. "You know, when all this first happened, when Will left you for Natalie, I was so angry on your behalf. I wanted you to fight back just to hurt him the way he hurt you." "I remember," I said, smiling at the memory of her fierce loyalty. "But now I'm glad everything played out the way it did, not because it hurt Will, but because it revealed you, the real Rebecca Mitchell who had been hiding behind Mrs. William Mitchell all those years." It was perhaps the most insightful observation anyone had made about my transformation. "The real Rebecca Mitchell," I repeated softly. "I'm still getting to know her myself." "Well, I like her a lot," Olivia declared. "She's badass." Back. At my condo, I kicked off my heels and poured a final glass of wine, taking it out to my rooftop garden. The Denver skyline sparkled against the night sky, the mountains a dark presence beyond. From this vantage point, the TechForce building was clearly visible, its upper floors still illuminated where late-working executives remained. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "Just checking in. Dinner with Olivia good?" "Perfect," I replied. "Planning an Aspen weekend soon. You should join us." "Count me in. Night, Mom. Love you." "Love you more," I texted back, our familiar exchange warming my heart. As I sipped my wine and gazed at the city lights, I reflected on the strange, painful, ultimately liberating journey of the past 6 months. When Will had first told me he was leaving, when he'd slid his wedding ring across our kitchen island with such cold finality, I'd felt as though my world was ending. The foundation of my identity had been pulled out from under me, leaving me flailing in empty space. I couldn't have known then that in that empty space, I would find not desolation, but possibility. That in the absence of William Mitchell, I would discover a Rebecca Mitchell worth knowing. The company he'd tried to take from me had ultimately propelled me to greater success than we'd achieved together. The life he'd assumed I couldn't navigate without him had become richer and more authentic on my own. The story he'd tried to end had turned out to be merely the prologue to something far more compelling. And that perhaps was the most satisfying outcome of all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.